Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
1 million jobs disappear. Welcome to the Wednesday edition, as today's payrolls number beats estimates, but revisions show a 7-figure loss from 2025. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. Kailey, the president says the golden age of America is upon us.
Yeah, the president also says we should have the lowest interest rates in the country. The question is whether, or in the world rather, this country should have. The question is whether or not this data actually supports a Federal Reserve lowering interest rates further when you did have a higher than expected print on from payrolls. The revisions, yes, nothing to sneeze at, but 130,000 print on jobs in January has this market pricing in a later Fed cut this year, looking at July instead of June.
That's right. We're going to get an update live from the White House. Tyler Kendall will tell us what the administration is saying, the way they're framing this. Of course, a lot of politics involved here. And then we'll dive into the numbers and look under the hood with Kitty Richards, who's back with us from the Groundwork Collaborative. We'll get a sense of what's important to her in these data. It's a Jobs Wednesday, which feels a little weird, kind of like a CPI Friday will too.
Yeah, we're all mixed up this week, at least when it comes to our domestic data. And while they are focused on that at the White House today, they're also focused on geopolitics, as the president is meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as we speak. Didn't open it up to press, as seems to be the norm now in 2026. But we know Iran featuring heavily on their agenda. That's
for sure. We didn't even see him go in the door. This is his 7th visit, and we've normally seen him walk into the West Wing with a bit of an arrival. We only learned that he was in the building after the meeting began, so we'll keep tabs on that for you. I'm sure Tyler's going to give us the latest as well.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu may have made more trips to the District of Columbia than I have in the last 6 half a year.
That's
He's
got to be
making
true.
His 7th during the Trump administration's
pretty remarkable.
Today.
7th. We didn't really see him on the last one. We may not see him today, which is interesting. They're talking about some pretty critical stuff here with potential strikes against Iran. Gaza, of course, is on the agenda as well. But we didn't even see him go in the front door, Kailey, and I'll be curious to see how long they talk.
Yeah, and if we learn anything about what exactly they discuss, as we know, Israel may be singing a bit of a different tune than President Trump himself as to what they'd like to see from Iran and its nuclear and ballistic missile program specifically.
That's true. Obviously, we've heard from Iran wanting to sort of narrow these talks around nukes, but Israel is deeply concerned about progress being made on its ballistic missile program, and I'm sure he'll be urging the president to get into that. But also, having claimed that their nuclear program had been totally obliterated, the president today has to face the Israeli prime minister, who wants him to acknowledge the fact that they are making progress on rebuilding it. Yeah, and let alone, of course, progress on rebuilding Gaza or reaching the next phase of the ceasefire agreement. There's still an open question mark in that regard, too. That's for sure. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall is with us, Washington correspondent, live from the North Lawn of the White House, where all of this is happening. Tyler, do we expect to see these two gentlemen later today?
Well, Joe, at this point, nothing remains open to the press, perhaps underscoring the sensitivity of these discussions. As you and Kailey were just outlining, we know Iran is at the top of the agenda amid reports that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is going to present new intelligence to President Trump regarding Iran's military capabilities. Now, ultimately, we know that this meeting this week comes after the Israeli Prime Minister had met in Jerusalem last week with Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, the two that are leading the now bilateral negotiations between the U.S. and Iran, which kicked off last Friday, and both sides characterized as relatively positive and said that they're going to have future talks likely next week when it comes to the second round. But going into the discussions, we know that there was sort of this shifting of parameters around what the talks would revolve around. Iran wanted them to be bilateral and only focused on their nuclear program. But part of the Israeli Prime Minister's goal here today, it's our understanding, is to press President Trump to make sure that those talks expand to other key issues for Israel and the United States. As we've repeatedly heard here from top administration officials, they want to also discuss Iran's ballistic missile program, as well as its support for proxy militia groups in the region. And the U.S. actually wants to bring in some other regional partners to these discussions, which officials say could help ultimately bolster the potential that a longer lasting deal could remain in place. At the moment, President Trump maintains diplomacy is on the table, but Joe and Kailey, as you well know, our own analysts at Bloomberg Economics have spoken about the high likelihood that we could ultimately see military strikes, particularly as President Trump just yesterday floated the idea that he could send a second armada to the region to bolster what is already a very large presence of U.S. military assets in the Arabian Sea.
Yeah, could be bringing in another carrier potentially. We'll see whether or not we get more commentary from the president in that regard, or anything at all that he might say about his meeting with Netanyahu today, Tyler. So far today, though, the only thing we've directly heard from the president on True Social, at least, is praise for the jobs report we got on this Wednesday. He said great jobs numbers, far greater than expected. No surprise, perhaps, that the White House is trying to focus exclusively on the positive here.
Right, no surprise there, Kailey. Even as this report showed revisions to last year, there was this marked slowdown in hiring. President Trump also in that post calling for lower interest rates, even as we know that traders are now pushing back bets for a Fed rate cut. So there's a lot that the administration is going to try to pull out of this report. They are focused on that upside surprise. It was interesting to hear officials ahead of this report, including the NEC director, Kevin Hassett, as well as the senior trade counselor, Peter Navarro, try to actually downplay expectations, saying that any weakness that may come is ultimately due to shifting population changes and the president's deportation policies. I've heard a few officials out this morning blaming any weakness on the prior administration, because this White House right now is really playing defense when it comes to the economy as we head into the midterm elections. I point you to a new poll out just this week from Gallup that shows 50% of U.S. adults are concerned about unemployment going up in the next 6 months and view the economy, but in particular the labor market, negatively. So there's going to be a lot to watch here as we head into November. But as you well know, this administration is really pushing those domestic manufacturing policies. In this report, we did see that factory jobs increased for the first time since late 2024, something that White House officials here have been pushing pretty strongly.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall live on the North Lawn at the White House. Thank you so much. And standing in the spot where Tyler was standing just now earlier this morning was actually the acting chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, Pierre Yared, who spoke with Bloomberg earlier today about these jobs numbers. This is how he characterized the figures.
Not only is it total jobs that are up above expectations, it's also private sector jobs that are at 170,000, so more than, or 160,000, which are more than double expectations. I think the way to think about, the way we were thinking about it is if you look at demographic changes as well as the big reduction in immigration relative to, in particular, illegal immigration relative to what was happening under the Biden administration, those two factors should lead you to lower break-evens.
And joining us now for another analysis, perhaps, is Katie Richards, who's here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. She's Senior Strategic Advisor at the Groundwork Collaborative, also former official at the Treasury Department under the Biden administration. Thanks for being with us on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
Thank you so much for having me.
Again, Katie, when we consider the first part of what he had to say there, this notion that jobs were double what the average expectation was. We did see a lower than expected unemployment rate, even as labor force participation was picking up. That is one way you could view and characterize this report. The other is, of course, look at the revisions, look at how gains are kind of exclusively in sectors like healthcare. How do you look at it today?
That's right. I do feel like focusing on the revisions is important. And I don't want to take away from the fact that we beat expectations on the labor market for January, although I do think that it's important to recall that expectations were quite low. So the revisions that the BLS announced led to a total net job gain for last year of 181,000 jobs. That is a number that we used to see as a month-over-month gain on a pretty regular basis. And in fact, in the 10 years prior to last year, the average job gain over the year was about 1.9 million jobs a year. So what we've seen is this very anemic job growth. And, you know, I was here last year during some of these prints, and it was already concerning what was happening with the unemployment rate, what was happening with the pace of hires and firing, and to then see that actually we were way off and the labor market was much softer than it appeared, I think is troubling, though it does kind of align with some of the anecdotes that we've been hearing from job seekers who say it's difficult to find a job. We're seeing those jobs numbers start to look a little bit more like that soft labor market that people were experiencing.
Interesting, Kitty. But the president says the golden age of America is upon us. So when do the jobs start showing up?
I think that's a great question. And, you know, Kailey, you mentioned that what we saw in the revisions and in the monthly data is increasingly what job growth there is driven by the healthcare sector specifically. And in fact, last year outside of healthcare, there was actually a net reduction in jobs across the economy. And thinking about, where are those healthcare jobs? Are they good jobs? Are they going to continue to deliver, especially given that the president has passed into law really large healthcare cuts that are going to start coming down the pike over the next few years, and families are having to face really high healthcare premiums. Thinking about, we see GDP growth continuing, and people are often very focused on, is this a sign of a recession? Are we at a tipping point? But I think the bigger question is, how is the economy performing for real people? Mm-hmm. And so when we see GDP growth that is driven to an outsized extent by, for example, the building and stocking with materials of data centers for AI. One way to look at that is that AI is driving GDP growth, but is it driving jobs? Is it driving increases in wages? Or is it just sort of an accounting fact that we have a lot being spent on computers? So really thinking about how this impacts workers and the day-to-day. And we might not be in a recessionary environment, but you can still have a softening labor market that's going to hold down wages, going to make it hard, especially for new graduates and other entrants into the labor market, to get a job that can pay the bills.
Well, and I'm sure the Fed and officials there are considering some of those very same questions you were asking about what dynamics are actually at play here, both when it comes to growth overall and in the labor market. So if you're sitting in the Federal Reserve right now, you look at all this data before you, is it supporting the idea that we need looser policy, that more cuts should be coming, or not?
I think it's a complicated question for the Fed to deal with because, of course, inflation remains elevated. And the Fed is very concerned about signaling to the markets that they are going to keep inflation under control and bring it back down. Jerome Powell has reiterated on multiple occasions that the Fed's target rate is still 2%, and we're well above that. And so they are balancing those equities. I do think that the president's advocacy is a little bit of a double-edged sword. As you were pointing out, he's at the same time saying that this was incredibly strong labor market conditions that we're seeing, and also we should cut interest rates. I think there are also issues with the new nominee for the Fed Board of Governors, for the Fed chair, is really being received as mostly a political appointment who will do what the president says or will try to. I think that other members of the Fed Board of Governors are going to be concerned about maintaining a posture of neutrality and of independence. And it's all going to be really difficult as it plays out. And I'll be watching along with you.
I want to get back to this impact of AI on the job market, because it's impossible to quantify right now. Elon Musk just told a podcast that created this vision of buildings 20, 30 stories tall, filled with humans doing calculations that will soon be replaced by a laptop. If you can't forecast that, how does the Fed forecast that? How do you have any estimate for where we're going?
I think that we are in a little bit uncharted territories in some ways, but also this isn't the first time that we've had a potentially disruptive technology enter the scene. And I think it's important to keep our wits about us as we think about, as we measure what we think of Elon Musk's predictions versus what we're actually seeing in the labor market.
Well, I could point you to Anthropic, and it only gets worse from here in some cases, by the way, that will all be replaced at some point. You're going to have two AI Kailey and Joe sitting here interviewing Kitty Richards.
I mean, one thing that I'd say is that what we know from the history of technology adoption is that it's really up to us as a society to decide whether technologies like AI are used to provide more to Americans, to provide more, leisure, more productivity gains that lead to higher wages, support people in their jobs, or whether things just kind of get worse and worse and cost-cutting increases and people are de-skilled, people's jobs are de-skilled. These are policy choices that we really have to make. And I think if we just let the sort of techno optimists who also stand to make another $1 trillion if things go their way. If we let them entirely set the agenda, we're going to see the worst possible effects.
He was wearing a T-shirt that said "Optimism Prime." It's funny.
Optimism for whom?
Yeah.
You could probably do a whole thing on Elon Musk and the various T-shirts.
It's gotta be
Remember
true.
the apparel he had early on in the early days of this administration. Just quickly, Kitty, before we let you go, as we're approaching tax refunds, we are in tax season now, and the argument Republicans are making is Americans are about to get a way bigger refund than they expected, and this is going to be juice for the economy. Given everything that we're seeing with the cost inflation, with wages not necessarily keeping up, as you were alluding to, should we expect that's going to be funneled back into consumption, consumer spending, or is that literally just assistance in making ends meet?
Well, unfortunately for the Republicans making this argument, I think that given how much they've hyped up the effects of their tax policies, Americans might be expecting a significantly larger refund than they are going to get. Because remember that the vast majority of the Republicans' tax bill flowed to the wealthy and corporations. And so your typical American family did not have much to gain there. What they have seen, unfortunately, is these skyrocketing healthcare premiums, partly because of the expiration of the ACA subsidies. And what they're going to see out of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is Medicaid cuts that are already starting to impact hospitals and state budgets around the country.
Great to have Kitty Richards back with us in studio. We never got to 15% growth. We have so much more to talk about.
Next time.
Don't be a stranger. Senior Strategic Advisor, the Groundwork Collaborative, and great insights from Kitty Richards. Thank you, as always, for the conversation. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. We'll assemble our political panel next, only here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Meantime, Joe and I here in Washington are keeping an eye on the White House as well as on Capitol Hill today and every day. And there will be some action on Capitol Hill potentially later this evening, specifically when it comes to a vote in the House of Representatives on the president's tariffs policy, tariffs on Canada specifically. It's a resolution that has been put forward by Democratic Congressman Gregory Meeks of New York that will now see a vote forced, despite the attempts of the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, to make sure that that did not happen, putting some of his vulnerable members in the majority in a tricky position of going on the record as to whether or not they support these policies. Because Speaker Johnson, despite knowing that he had a very thin majority and the math was going to be hard, did try to pass a rule yesterday, Joe, that would have seen effectively an extension of the ban of putting forward tariff-related resolutions like this on the House floor. And 3 Republicans told the Speaker and the President, we're not with you on this one.
That's true. Not all the names surprising, but this is getting back to why margins matter here. 217, 214. The Speaker's seen this movie a lot of times. All right. Tom Massey of Kentucky. I know you're not surprised. Add Kevin Kailey of California, Don Bacon of Nebraska, and it's a fail. The question is, and we'll have to pose this to the panel, is this a watershed moment or just a jailbreak of 3 members?
Well, and when we consider the composition of those 3 members, yes, Bacon's retiring, Massey, as you point out, not unusual to break with the party. Kevin Kailey, though, could potentially be representative of an entire group of Republicans, those who are in swing districts having tough seats to defend, who have to consider these policies and what they mean for their constituencies a bit more carefully. So could there be more Kevin Kaileys coming out of the woodwork on actual tariff resolutions?
Well, you outlined that perfectly. And this is what Democrats are hoping, because they're going to have a series of votes like the one tonight with Meeks on Canada to try to put Republicans on the record, knowing that this won't likely become law. The president's going to veto it. But a lot of political ads can be made in the meantime. We're going to find out who's worried about tariffs and who is worried about Trump. Let's assemble our panel for their take on this. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis are with us. Jeanne is our Democratic analyst and democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Rick, a partner at Stonecourt Capital, our Republican strategist. How are you reading these 3, Rick, knowing that the Senate has already voted against Donald Trump's tariff regime? Is this, in fact, a rebuke? Did the president find the line, or are we making too much out of this?
Yeah, I think Kailey nailed it with sort of the various motivations, although I would say Kevin Kailey, I mean, he actually doesn't have a district. His was wiped out with Proposition 50, the redistricting. So he's out there wandering around trying to figure out where he's going to run for re-election. But he does plan to run for re-election. But he does represent, I would say, almost the majority of the Republican caucus in the House of Representatives, who are very offended that the president has usurped their Article 1 constitutional responsibility to make tariffs. And so if you needed 4 votes and not just the 3 that you got, would you have gotten another Republican? Probably. And I would say, too, with this one, this goes right to the White House. I mean, yeah, we like to see the speaker deliver the votes, but the White House said, you know what, this is on us. We're going to make this happen. We're going to put the pressure on these guys. And so the White House Ledge Office was all over this thing. And this is a huge loss for Trump. It's his first big loss legislatively where he thought he could actually win. And so is this a thing of the future? Maybe. A lot of these guys are from districts that are not going to be easy to win re-election in a bad cycle year. And I wouldn't be surprised to see more jailbreaks in that regard.
Well, so when we consider the potential scope and scale of said jailbreaks, Jeanne, Rick just suggested it might be a majority of the Republican conference in the House of Representatives that actually disapproves or at least wants the congressional authority to be the one that matters on tariffs. Are we wrong in assuming that a 2/3 majority, veto-proof majority, could actually be present or not be present on this issue?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of there's so many confounding things about what happened last night to me. Number one, if this passed Congress, the president was going to veto it, and it was going to, it's hard for me to imagine he wouldn't survive that veto. But, setting that aside, we knew very clearly, because all 3 of these individuals forecast that they were not going to vote for this thing. So Mike Johnson knew it, the White House should have known it, and yet they let it go forward as if it wasn't going to be a big loss for them. As opposed to what you would think a normal White House would do is you are facing a very difficult election year in just 9 months from yesterday. Let your Republican members in these swing districts, these purple districts who are trying desperately to win, give them a little latitude to go against you on something that most Republicans don't support, which is tariffs and taxes. But instead, they want to keep everybody together. And, to me, this seems like the same thing we see Pam Bondi doing in the DOJ. Mike Johnson is playing to an audience of 1. You go to the DOJ, try for indictments you're never going to get. You go to the floor, try for votes you're never going to get, and then say to Donald Trump, oh, listen, I tried, can't blame me. Look at the grand jurors or look at Tom Massey if you're upset. I mean, I think that's what's going on here, but it makes no sense politically or strategically for these Republicans or for this White House.
Well, I'll tell you, it also did not make sense, apparently, to a grand jury to indict the 6 Democratic members of Congress who urged members of the military in a video that came out some weeks ago now, we've talked about it, to not follow unlawful orders. This is when we were busy blowing up alleged drug boats coming out of Venezuela. And you remember this video, Alyssa Slotkin, Mark Kelly, and others? Here's a little refresher.
This administration is pitting our uniformed military
and intelligence community professionals
against American citizens. Like us, you all swore an oath
to protect and defend this Constitution.
Right now, the threats to our Constitution aren't just coming from abroad, but from right here at home.
Our laws are clear. You can refuse illegal orders.
That was called sedition by the president. This grand jury decided that this was not a case. They failed to secure the indictment here, despite the better intentions of the attorney general. This is something that came up in Pam Bondi's testimony earlier. Rick, what do you make of this? I know that Mark Kelly is still in some hot water here with Pete Hegseth specifically, but as far as these other members go, is this a good day for the Constitution? If you read the quote from Jason Crow, the Democrat from Colorado who we saw there, I can't even read it on the air. I'll do my best. If these effers think they're going to intimidate us and threaten and bully me into silence, they have another thing coming. Rick, this is clearly a bridge too far. What's the recourse?
Are you baiting me to do something I shouldn't do on air? No, I doubt
I wouldn't.
Look, I mean, this is the most confounding thing I've ever seen. First of all, it was a total political stunt by these 6 Democrats to do that video. I mean, when does anybody do a video to talk writ large to 1 million uniformed service personnel? I mean, come on. But what happens? The White House totally takes the bait. I mean, like, you're supposed to ignore stuff like this. And in taking the bait, not only does the president say some pretty injurious stuff about like this is seditious and these people should be put to death. That's a bad thing, right? That's a bad news day for Donald Trump. He doesn't really mean it. I'm highly confident he doesn't want to put Mark Kelly to death. But at the end of the day, he unleashes the Justice Department on him. And then what happens? They elevate Mark Kelly. Now people are talking about him running for president of the United States in 2028. I mean, like, that's the best thing that ever happened to Mark Kelly's political career. So, you know, I don't understand why everyone isn't just taking a step back on this and saying, you know what, this makes absolutely no sense. Why are we prosecuting this thing? And now to get the black eye of a grand jury saying no to the Justice Department, by the way, in another high profile case like the Comey and the Letitia James case, they're like striking out at the plate. So I don't know. I mean, to me, this was all very avoidable, but I guess if you want to play, you gotta decide whether you're going to win or lose.
Yeah. Well, and to the point Rick is making on these strikeouts, Jeanne, arguably the bar for a grand jury indictment isn't incredibly high necessarily. We're not talking conviction here. This is just the indictment to try to make to bring the case forward. Do you take heart in the fact that this isn't necessarily just everything the DOJ wants, the DOJ is getting?
Yeah, the old ham sandwich, Kailey. And, you know, somebody was saying at the hearing today, the number of strikeouts by this DOJ is astronomical compared to any attempts to get grand jury indictments in the years before. And so I believe we are hearing Pam Bondi respond to messages that Donald Trump has accidentally sent her publicly. And I'm sure she's gotten a lot more heated messages from him privately saying, you need to pursue this. So again, very much like Mike Johnson, even though they know they're going to strike out, they keep pursuing this and end up looking weak. And, you know, somebody said, and it's so true, this video that they put forward is the same message that the Department of the Defense Law of War Manual says. And yet you're going to try to go to grand jurors and indict people for repeating what the Law of War Manual actually says. That's a non-starter. And God bless our grand jurors. We now are in a situation in this country where it is average people on the street who are hauled into a grand jury to sit, who are checking the president and the DOJ, who are wildly overstepping any sort of executive mandate. It's not a great place for our country to be, but it's where we are. And if we had courts that would do the same, we'd be in better shape. But now we have grand jurors who are saying this is a non-starter in a way they never have before in American history.
All right, Jeanne, Sheehan, Zaino, and Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributors in our political panel today. Thank you both, as always, for joining us. That was, of course, Joe, one element of the questions the Attorney General Pam Bondi was on the receiving end of today on Capitol Hill. We didn't even mention all the questions she got about the Epstein files and those unredactions.
Yeah, well, we'll see if Massey and Khanna find any unredacted files today. We're going to turn our attention to the White House. Benjamin Netanyahu is meeting with the president right now. It's next on Bloomberg.
Well, we want to dive a little bit deeper into the action we are seeing on this Wednesday trading day and turn to Alexandra Semenova, Bloomberg News U.S. Equities reporter. As Nora was just running us through, Alexandra, you're seeing a lot of fluctuation today. Are we to view this more as a macro story tied to jobs, or is this a micro story tied to more individual stocks, like software stocks specifically?
Hey, Kailey. So it is a little bit of both today. You know, on one hand, on the macro side, you got a labor market report that showed that jobs growth exceeded expectations handily. So it eased any concerns that investors had about slowing growth. But on the flip side of that, of course, it's causing a recalibration in expectations for interest rate cuts. So the repricing is causing some of the volatility. But stocks were higher in the morning after the report, and it was really the selling of software stocks that saw the market go lower. So the story around AI first was this concern that we're in a bubble, that hyperscalers are spending way too much money, and investors were worried about whether they can monetize that heavy CapEx spending. But now the narrative is kind of that AI is coming for different industries, replacing a lot of the companies' business models, and that is seeing the pressure in software shares. The Bloomberg Magnificent 7 index fell as much as 1% today. It has paired some of that loss, but some of the pain today is in the iShares Expanded Tech Software Sector ETF. That is IGV. It is down about 4% today, and of course, software stocks have been under pressure for a while. Something worth pointing out is that this hasn't really been broad-based selling, but a rotation out of technology stocks. If you look at the S&P equal weight, for example, which gives the same weighting to Amazon, a giant like Amazon, and a relative minnow like Newell Brands, for example, it is slightly outperforming the S&P 500 today, and it is up 6% this year compared to the S&P 500's 1.5% gain. So a lot of it is just rotation out of tech and investors trying to figure out who the new winners are.
Well, to that end, Alexandra, it's great to have you with us today. I keep beating the drum on this. Even on our worst day last week, the equal weight S&P 500 hit a new all-time high. Guess what? It did it again today. So this is proof that this rotation is not a head fake this time, right?
Exactly, Joe. We also saw the Dow Jones Industrial Average hitting a record yesterday. It is down slightly today, but it seems like investors are trying to figure out where to park their money after the run-up that we've had in tech. Some pretty remarkable figures out of Deutsche Bank this past week. We saw inflows into sector funds outside of tech hit $62 billion in the first 5 weeks of this year. For context, that is more of all of 2025. So there's really been this incredible rotation. And again, you mentioned that equal weighted S&P 500 outperforming. Really incredible to see given, the strength that we've seen in tech and some of the Magnificent Seven companies outperforming up until now.
Well, it's great to have you again. Alexandra Semenova, live from World Headquarters in New York. We'll get another update on stocks from Nora Melinda coming up at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Thanks for being with us on the Wednesday edition of Balance of Power as Kailey and I turn to matters abroad. By way of the White House here, Benjamin Netanyahu is in the White House right now with President Trump. We just have not seen him, which is pretty unusual for the visit of a foreign leader. In this case, well, maybe not unusual because we didn't see him last time he was here either. This is the 7th visit that Netanyahu has made to this White House, and he was brought in the side door today. We didn't learn he was there until the meeting was already underway. It's unclear if we will see these two gentlemen after they meet, but they have a lot to talk about by way of Iran, of course, and Gaza. And it's where we begin our conversation with Rebecca Lissner, Senior Fellow for U.S. Foreign Policy at the Council on Foreign Relations, a former Deputy Assistant to the President, Principal Deputy National Security Advisor to the Vice President in the Biden administration. Rebecca, thank you for joining us. What do you make of the fact that this is happening behind closed doors and away from cameras and microphones?
Well, exactly as you said, this is Prime Minister Netanyahu's 7th visit to the United States since President Trump assumed his 2nd term in office. And that's more than any foreign leader. The agenda is jam-packed. And in fact, Prime Minister Netanyahu was supposed to come to Washington next week, but he accelerated his visit. He moved it up by a week, and he's in there right now, just a block from where I am, because he's worried. He's worried about the negotiations that the Trump administration is pursuing with Iran, and he's concerned that President Trump might make concessions on issues that are a red line for Israel.
Is he right to be worried, Rebecca? Are you worried?
So here's the thing. There are 3 major questions at issue in U.S.-Iran negotiations. The first is the nuclear program. This is the question that has been on the table throughout Trump's presidency and indeed even before. And at the heart of it is whether Iran will agree to give up its right to domestic enrichment of uranium, the process that is required to build a nuclear bomb. And President Trump seemed like he might be poised to concede on this issue back in June before the Israel-Iran war. But Prime Minister Netanyahu preempted any possible concessions and any possible deal by launching a military campaign against Iran, which the United States ultimately joined. So now we're back at the negotiating table with U.S.-Iran talks beginning to pick up momentum. U.S. and Iranian negotiators actually met face-to-face just last week in Oman. And so the question here is Iran going to breach its own red line on never agreeing to constraints on its own domestic enrichment of uranium? Or is the Trump administration going to cave and agree to something short of what Prime Minister Netanyahu would like to see? But unlike in June, Rebecca, there are other issues. Oh, go ahead.
Please go ahead. Sorry.
Just going to say, unlike in June, there are other issues on the table as well. And precisely because the joint U.S.-Israeli campaign was so militarily effective against Iran during the 12-day war, now Israel and the U.S. want to see more. And so now there's a discussion also about limits on Iran's ballistic missile program and also limits on its support to regional proxy groups. both of which were off the table previously and are issues on which Iran is unlikely to make major concessions, but have become major red lines for Israel.
The president said that we had totally obliterated Iran's nuclear program and, in fact, was offended, said it was an insult to the service members who conducted the strike to suggest otherwise. Is Benjamin Netanyahu telling him otherwise today?
What I think we know and what the U.S. intelligence community seems to have concluded in the wake of the strike is that Iran's nuclear program was severely damaged by the strikes in June. There's no question about that. But in the months since, Iran has been dedicating most of its resources and attention to rebuilding its missile program. And you'll recall that now on several occasions in April and October of 2024 and during the war last June, Iran launched significant missile salvos at Israel. And that's why Prime Minister Netanyahu has somewhat moved the goalposts. He now wants to see limits on Iran's missile program, and if not, he's threatening to strike it himself.
Well, and of course, when Iran tried to send those missiles Israel's way, by and large, the vast majority of them were intercepted either by Israel's own defenses or the defenses of allies, including the United States, for example. When we consider the United States positioning now in this region, President Trump, of course, has said he has sent an armada. One he told Axios could actually potentially get bigger. He's considering apparently sending in a second aircraft carrier, Rebecca. How should we think about that strategic position and what we might actually be looking to do if negotiations are not ultimately successful?
Well, for most of the post-October 7th period in the Middle East, the United States had 2 aircraft carriers in the region. Right now, we only have 1 carrier strike group. So the United States' ability to inflict significant damage on Iran, on its missile sites, on its nuclear sites, on its regime targets, that remains significant. But I wouldn't expect to see military activity unless and until that second carrier strike group is moved into the region, at which point the United States will have more capabilities at its disposal, both to do offensive strikes against Iran should it choose to do so, but also to defend U.S. troops, U.S. personnel, U.S. sites in the region, and also, precisely as you said, to help Israel in defending itself against whatever kinds of missile salvos, UAVs, and so on Iran might send its way.
Wow. That's fascinating, Rebecca. So a second carrier strike group is necessary to complement when it comes to force protection? You don't think anything happens till then?
That would be my expectation. Again, there is still the possibility that military action could happen sooner, but based on my experience in national security policy, I would not say that the region is yet set for major military operations.
Well, and as we lean on your experience, Rebecca, advising a president of the United States on issues regarding foreign policy. From that purview of advising and considering political ramifications, would you be advising this president currently to be focusing so much on these issues, on the Middle East, on Venezuela, on Greenland, rather than issues domestically here at home, like affordability?
Well, look, you are starting to see a pretty significant and growing outcry from President Trump's MAGA movement about the amount of time that he's spending on foreign policy. And it's not completely unusual for a second-term president, and especially for a lame duck president who won't be running again, to focus internationally. But we have really significant issues here at home. And so at the same time as President Trump is seeking to change the nature of the Venezuelan regime and take ownership of its oil capacity, at the same time as President Trump is seeking to shape Iranian politics and potentially contemplating additional military strikes, there are really significant issues happening here at home. People are hurting. They're feeling that their bills have gotten too high. And so I would say that the attention focused abroad is always warranted. It's what we expect from a commander in chief. But the balance seems to be off if you look at the feedback he's getting from his own constituents.
We should note that Axios is reporting that meeting is ending now after some 3 hours. Rebecca, we haven't even mentioned Gaza in our conversation yet. Where does it lie on the agenda?
Gaza will certainly be on the agenda today as well. And the issue that's front and center is the demobilization of Hamas, and in particular, the disarmament of Hamas. We've now moved into the second phase of implementation of President Trump's 20-point plan. But frankly, it's been stalled because as long as Hamas retains its weaponry, light weaponry, heavy weaponry, it's going to be impossible to convince an international force to go in and begin the stabilization mission that is envisioned in Gaza. And so the key question is going to be, what is the extent of Hamas disarmament that is acceptable to Israel? What is the extent of Hamas disarmament that's acceptable to the United States? And can they reach a middle ground that Hamas itself will also accept in such a way that allows the peace plan to go forward? If not, we'll find ourselves stuck. Hamas will retain control over part of Gaza. Israel will retain control over part of Gaza. And Prime Minister Netanyahu has been very clear that a resumption of military activity is very much on the table.
We only have a minute left here, Rebecca, but how significant is it that Netanyahu has signed on now to be a member of the Board of Peace?
I think it's an endorsement of that structure at a time when many important countries have declined to sign off. But frankly, it's not determinative in the implementation of a peace deal like this one. The even smallest details can be enough to derail it. And so I would say on issues like the demilitarization of Hamas, what specifically is agreed, it's much more important than these overarching bodies that the president has tried to launch in order to oversee the process.
All right, Rebecca, thank you so much. Rebecca Lissner, Senior Fellow for U.S. Foreign Policy at the Council on Foreign Relations, also, of course, former National Security Advisor to the Vice President during the Biden administration. I should note, Joe, after that meeting that just wrapped, almost 3 hours long, we have a readout from President Trump. He says it was a very good meeting and the tremendous relationship between our two countries continues. There was nothing definitive reached, he says.
Interesting. Referring to Iran. Hopefully this time they will be more reasonable and responsible. Additionally, discuss tremendous progress being made in Gaza. We'll have a lot more on this on the late edition of Balance of Power. That starts at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Alongside Kailey, Leinz, I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. This is Bloomberg.